With Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny right around the corner, I thought I'd continue my look back at the Indiana Jones film series. Next up is Temple of Doom, which you know already since you clicked on this video. Between the so-called good Indiana Jones films, Temple is generally considered to be the worst one, right? Is it too dark? Are Willie and Short Round too annoying? Is the pacing too clunky? Is it too racist? We'll discuss all this and more. Let's jump right in. Having just watched and reviewed Raiders, I'd definitely say that Temple is a pretty significant step backward. That said, when compared to one of the consensus greatest films ever made, it still results in a pretty good movie. I appreciated that it took a lot of risks. It didn't just give the audience what they wanted.
It certainly was a darker kind of story, but well worth it, I think, for the originality of that film. Compared to what I think expectations were for it, it was a little bit more challenging.
Most sequels are just the same movie done over again, but you definitely can't say that about Temple of Doom, which is kind of refreshing.
With one big difference, we were not remaking Raiders of the Lost Ark, we were making a new movie called Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
But I don't mind the film. We definitely wanted to make a different movie from Raiders. We didn't want to just do the same movie over again.
With some tweaking, I really think this film could have had the chance to be in the same conversation as Raiders.
You know, of all the Raider indie films, Temple of Doom is my least favorite.
I don't know who these two knucklehead screenwriters are, but they're not Larry Kasdan, and there are clear issues with the script's characters, structure, and pacing. The pacing is serviceable for the most part, but the film does begin to drag for me about halfway through, somewhere between their discovery of the cult and the final action sequence, but up until then I was mostly engaged, and the opening and final action sequences are unspeakably awesome.
And we went ahead and designed a 15 to 18 minute third act climax from an unseen Indiana Jones adventure. You won't have to wait for the exposition and the development of all the characters. All you get is the dessert. And I thought that would be a real great way of hooking the audience into the spirit of Indiana Jones.
Like with Raiders, I adored the aesthetic and world building. Indy is still like the coolest guy ever. I love how he just casually knows how to speak the language of the villagers fluently.
Saying when the sacred stone was taken, the village wells dried up and the river turned to sand.
The dialogue is a little blunt, but I love the idea that Indy went on, quote, many adventures with this random guy, Wuhan.
I followed you on many adventures into the great unknown mystery. I go first, Indy.
Like, Indy has just been on so many of these equally incredible adventures, and this guy is just one of, like, who knows how many interesting characters Indy gets to work with. It's one of those things where leaving it up to our imagination just makes the whole thing a lot cooler. I think he's a character who modern audiences will still connect with easily. He's smart, mostly noble, good in a fight, yet vulnerable in very human ways. The stuff in Temple, where Spielberg's clearly in full control, i.e. basically anything unrelated to the script, is excellent. As good as any of his other Prime works. Like, the bridge sequence is just so tense, even though I know exactly what's going to happen. There are many sequences in the film that are true masterworks, indicative of Spielberg at the top of his game. It really is just the script that sucks. Outside of Indy, the characters all kinda suck, the villains all kinda suck, the pacing kinda sucks. Neither Chatterlal or Molaram are even remotely as compelling as Belloc or Major Toad. You'd think that maybe the writers could at least get credit for helping come up with the awesome set pieces, but no, these were mostly just leftovers from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark was too super packed with gags and stunts and set pieces. It's just no movie could hold that much. So certain things carried over, and I always remembered the river rafting scene, which we had written for Raiders, which I saved and kind of bookmarked for another Raiders movie. And then we had an entire minecart chase, like a roller coaster ride. That was originally written for Raiders.
So we took a lot of the good sequences from Raiders and put it in there and then fit the story around it.
For reference, the next thing these two worked on was a garbage movie you've never heard of called Best Defense, and after that they wrote and directed Howard the Duck, which is widely considered to be one of the worst films ever made, and the duo's final film credit was Radioland Murders 8 years later, another critical and box office bomb. Where were you, Larry? Oh, you were writing Return of the Jedi? Okay, fine. And if you're like, wait, Lawrence Kasdan, writer of Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Empire Strikes Back, is the guy who gave us Ewoks? Well, don't worry, y'all. He shares the credit with George Lucas. Anyway, where was I? I also kind of love the opening number. It's so weird in such a fun way. Whose idea was this?
It's not my fault if this doesn't work.
If it's possible.
I didn't want to open the film with a dance number. I want to open the film with another rock.
They're gonna pick up.
It contributes to just how damn campy this film is in particular. I was actually surprised by how campy and silly the movie was, despite how dark it also gets. There are moments where this results in some tonal inconsistency, but overall I think it strikes the balance well enough. I was shocked at the not one, not two, but 3 separate Wilhelm screams throughout the film.
That was great. Just great.
Remember when they literally fell out of a plane on a tiny raft and fucking lived? Is it completely unrealistic and nonsensical? Yes. Does it not really fit in with any of the gags we see in the previous film? Sure. But this film isn't Raiders. It's about 1,000 times campier, and I honestly thought most of the campiness worked. Audiences in the 80s didn't really know what to make of this film because it is so damn weird in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of that might translate to audiences today, but all in all, the campiness and tone aren't detriments to the final product holding up. I also thought it was weird when Willie enters the dragon's mouth or whatever, and then we cut to some giant auditorium where the backup dancers perform some kind of number. Who's watching this? Who is this for? You and me? Lau? Then we re-enter the club and we see there's like no way anyone caught any of that, right? Whatever, it's a throwback, it's a throwback. Keep that in mind. While we're here, let's talk about Willie.
I found Willie Scott to be very, reading her, not very appealing, and I kept trying to figure out what was it that they saw in me that thought I could play that part.
It's been a good 6 or 7 years since I'd last watched this movie, so I was curious as to how I'd feel about her. Generally speaking, I'm gonna keep it a buck, she is pretty damn annoying. And yeah, I don't think it's a stretch to say that some modern audiences might think that aspects of her material come across as sexist.
The biggest trouble with her is the noise.
When the film came out, there were so many people who didn't like her. She did not represent a strong female at all. She was, feminists just really came after Willie Scott.
If I can rephrase a Reddit comment I found, Willie is sort of an exaggerated caricature of a woman, kind of like how Indy is an exaggerated caricature of a man. Unfortunately, Indy gets all of the good stereotypical manly traits, and Willie gets all of the bad stereotypical womanly traits.
Oh, I broke a nail. I thought that because it was Saturday sort of matinee film, that we could play with like a stereotype, really. It was a stereotype, this woman.
If the movie was more satirical and maybe more obviously self-aware, you could definitely do stuff like this and make it work. Unfortunately, as we discussed previously, these two may be the worst screenwriters ever and have no ability to convey anything with any amount of nuance or subtlety.
I think he had a great interest in women, and I think sometimes that interest was interrupted by the adventure, and then the women can become a problem, and he wonders why are they along.
The whole joke is, aren't women so annoying? Don't they get scared super easily, whereas manly men don't? She's obsessed with diamonds.
The diamonds inside them will glow.
Diamonds?
Diamonds.
Diamonds?
Diamonds.
Cries about her nails breaking twice.
I burnt my fingers and I cracked a nail!
Is constantly complaining about everything.
Pancot? I can't go to Pancot. I'm a singer. Oh, I need to call my agent. Is there a phone? Anybody? I need a phone.
And is played up to be so utterly irritating. I really think if it was handled better, it could have come across as just some weird snooty person being uptight, kind of like C-3PO, but really she's genuinely annoying in the film, and not in a good way. And there are elements that feel a little unintentionally sexist 40 years later.
So again, here I am, college educated, master's degree.
Listener Hachi's a real small guy.
Half of my doctorate, I'm a single mom, I am woman, hear me roar. I'm living the life of such a feminist. And here I am being, not attacked, but I'm definitely being called on the carpet for creating this female that was, stereotypically not a feminist, with her fingernails and her this and her that and her whining and complaining and screaming. I couldn't have had more fun doing it.
I don't know. I'm really not trying to pearl clutch here. I honestly think this is a minor issue, if one at all. Really, all I'm trying to say is that the whole haha aren't women annoying joke is kind of outdated and not particularly funny by modern standards. But even if you think there are no sexist elements here whatsoever, her character is not particularly compelling, and I think modern audiences will at least be somewhat annoyed by how over the top she is. Like the scene where she's running around this soundstage screaming back and forth and there's just random animals here and there is so comical. It's like something out of a slapstick comedy. She just screams so fucking much in this movie.
And of course, I told him when we were filming it, there was too much screaming. I did not know how to scream. By the way, I didn't read all that either. And then she screams, and then she screams, hello, can she do anything else besides scream?
If they toned down some of the craziness and maybe some of the screaming, she could have been a genuinely interesting love interest that contrasted well with the badass and highly independent Marion from Raiders. There's a nucleus of what could have been a cool relationship and dynamic, but its execution goes a little too far in a few places.
It was so much fun to play this very annoying, petulant.
What about Short Round? If Willie is C-3PO, Shorty is R2-D2.
It's like R2-D2. I mean, it's a little thing that fits into the action really brilliantly.
Hey, don't agree with me, asshole. That makes me look bad coming from you. Shorty feels like a typical George Lucas cynical decision, including a kid in his movie because he noticed that kids enjoyed Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's why Return of the Jedi has a bunch of kiddie stuff. It's why these Star Wars prequels have kids all over the fucking place. Hell, this movie is a prequel. Stop with the prequels, George.
Now they pulled a little trick on me. They made him 3 years younger. 3 years younger? 2 or 3 years younger than he was last time. Now I don't know why they would do something like that. Because I got 3 years older and the character got 2 years younger, which makes me 5 years older than I should be for the character. And I can feel the difference.
Why is this a prequel anyway? According to Lucas, it's because he just didn't want to make the Nazis the villains again, but like, you wouldn't have had to do that, right? There could have been other villains in the world in the late 30s, early 40s, right? And then you just did it again for the next film anyway. What was I talking about?
Okay, we gotta get Robert down here. We don't have enough bugs to make the scene work.
Oh yeah, Shorty. So what's the general consensus on Shorty?
He is one of the greatest experiences I've ever had directing not only a child actor, but directing a complete unknown, a complete newcomer. A little kid struggling with English in school in Chinatown who suddenly becomes this little movie star.
Obviously, everyone finds Willie to be annoying, and rightfully so, but in doing research for this script, I couldn't find anything definitive on Shorty. Some people seem to find him annoying, others seem to think he's fun. I'm somewhat in the middle, maybe leaning towards finding his execution to be subpar. His contributions range from mildly amusing to pointless and distracting. Half the time, he's just repeating something that Indy says.
Eat it. Eat it.
Which is kinda cute because he clearly looks up to him and wants to be like him, and you could have had like a father-son dynamic, but again, the execution just isn't quite there for me. Starting from early on, whenever he was in a scene, I tried to think to myself, would this scene work equally well or better without him in it? And probably around 3/4 of the time, the answer was yes. There are moments where he's fun and charming enough.
Hey, Dr. Joe, no time for love!
But generally, he just makes pointless interjections that I found distracting to the flow of the scene, and his comedic moments are pretty hit or miss. Again, like with Willie, I think this concept could have worked if there was any semblance of competent screenwriting, but ultimately I found Shorty to not work 100% well in this film. I don't even understand their relationship. Indy said he just found Shorty after he tried pickpocketing him, but like, does Shorty live with Indy now? Did he adopt him? Do they just hang out only when Indy visits Shanghai?
Indy, I love you! You're my best friend!
Where is he in Raiders and Last Crusade if they have such a close relationship? Again, with just a little bit of tweaking, he could have worked and been a positive, but that's just not the case in my opinion. Originally, George Lucas wanted Short Round to be a, quote, virginal young princess, but the rest of the creative team wasn't comfortable with that.
I mean, we had discussed doing it as a little girl, But then we thought, you know, this is kind of inappropriate.
Coupled with the fact that George originally wanted a 25-year-old Indy to have an affair with an 11-year-old Marion Ravenwood, as we discussed in my previous review, I feel like I'm starting to sense a very strange pattern here, but I digress. Hey, if you're enjoying the video, please subscribe. Okay, bye. Visually speaking, the film is pretty gorgeous. Not quite as strong as Raiders, but still a treat to look at. There are many gorgeous shots, interesting usage of lighting, and top-notch blocking and framing of dialogue scenes. Like with Raiders, there are obviously places where some of the more complex visual effects are beginning to show their age, but there are also places that still look really damn good. Like, I was blown away by the minecart sequence. It's the perfect example of blending all types of effects to produce your sequence.
There was a great tunnel set that had been built full size that they could get quite a few shots off of. But when the camera pulled back and needed to see a lot of distance, then we came in with our model work. And those characters in there were then animated by Tom Sanderman using stop motion animation.
Tom might spend anywhere from 1 minute to 5 minutes per frame animating the figures. So it could take many hours to shoot one shot that might last 4 or 5 seconds on the screen.
Miniatures, full-scale sets, and rear screen projection that actually looks super good 90% of the time. Like shit, next you're gonna tell me these incredible looking miniature cave walls are made of like aluminum foil or something.
And we could actually make them out of aluminum foil.
Are you kidding me?
So we just bought a lot of aluminum foil, crunkled it up to look like a mine tunnel, painted it to look like rock, and for, you know, $1.98 we got some great sets.
Some obvious compositing stands out maybe, but all in all, it's really impressive even by today's standards, given the technology they had available. It's a lot of fun and very convincing. Does it sometimes look like Donkey Kong Country? Maybe, but it's pretty damn cool. With all that said, there are aspects to the visuals that are definitely going to show their age and stand out to modern audiences. While some of the matte paintings are gorgeous and very convincing even on Blu-ray, others are more obvious. There are also moments where the compositing is incredibly obvious, and maybe y'all Zoomers might get a chuckle out of it. I really love the spike collapse scene, but immediately after that, they're like in compositing hell.
Indiana Jones, you know, sort of goes to hell.
But I don't think these things will really distract you from the flow of the scene and aren't harmful to the film holding up in any meaningful capacity. This scene in particular, though, is just gaudy looking. It reminds me of that terrible looking scene in Raiders. The compositing is so harsh, the matte painting doesn't match at all. And holy hell, there's a shooting star. I feel like they storyboarded a cool and moody scene that just didn't pan out in the execution. Okay, I've been stalling. Let's get into the meat. Is this film racist? Warning, if you're someone who uses the word woke as an unironic pejorative, skip to this time code if you want to keep enjoying the video. Otherwise, buckle up, Buttercup. One thing I want to clarify before we dig in is what I and others mean when we say something is racist in this context. To a lot of people, racism starts and ends with, am I saying the N-word directly to a black person's face? And if the answer is no, then whatever action is in question is not racist. The reality is that what can be interpreted as racist can be more nuanced than that. So with that in mind, let's talk about what we see in Temple of Doom. Let's start with what is arguably the most egregious example that people cite. Argument number 1, the dinner scene. Is this racist? Survey says, pretty much yeah. So why do people say this is racist? Well, for one thing, none of the bizarre foods eaten here have anything to do with any regional Indian cuisine.
And I think that's why he came to us, because he knew we were interested in the country and had some knowledge of it.
Raw snake babies, giant beetles, chilled monkey brains, a soup with just some guy's eyeballs floating around. These things were all just nonsense that the creative team came up with.
I mean, we did have a lot of fun discussing it because it was, oh, let's sit around just thinking the most horrible things you could think of, but it's done very tongue-in-cheek.
But what's the subtext? Well, I read it as, hey, predominantly white-ass Americans in the mid-80s, aren't other unfamiliar cultures around the world so weird? Isn't it hilarious that they're eating this disgusting stuff unlike us? Like, I don't think for a minute they were trying to say, hey, everybody, aren't Indians so weird and gross? But more broadly speaking, the sequence does end up portraying Indians, or perhaps more vaguely, foreign people in general, in a negative light, so in that way, it is at least culturally insensitive, and I do think that negative portrayals like this, even when tongue-in-cheek, matter, and can result in harmful and negative views about other cultures. One scholar wrote in the early 2000s that it seems to have been taken as a valid portrayal of India by many teachers, since a large number of students complained that teachers referred to the eating of monkey brains. Hell, even I thought this was like some weird traditional Indian cuisine because of this movie, probably up until I was in my early 20s. That kind of stuff can be harmful, and I think this is a perfectly valid thing to criticize the movie over. The most generous I'll be is that this scene does fit the tone. The movie is incredibly campy. Far more campy than Raiders, despite how dark it gets, and this scene fits in with that. Ultimately, it's yet another joke in this film that doesn't quite land in my opinion, and is a sequence, when viewed through a modern lens, that does not hold up.
By doing a kind of dark version of the Indiana Jones series, it gave permission to poke some fun at ourselves and have a scene that was really, toward gross out comedy.
Even if you strip away any subtext about anyone's race or culture or whatever, what you're left with is, ha ha ha, look, someone is eating weird food. So at best, it's just kind of a bad, poorly conceived, juvenile joke. Again, with some tweaking, could a joke like this work in the right context? Absolutely, but that's not the case here. Argument number 2. The film plays into the white savior trope. Survey says, clear and obvious yes. Basically, there's a trope in Hollywood about white people going into foreign non-white countries and saving the day, and many times these portrayals show the white saviors as better, smarter, and or more moral than their non-white counterparts. I do think this is a worthwhile topic of discussion. Having Indy literally fall from the sky and land on these destitute Indians who look like they're worshipping him like a god in these shots definitely fits that bill to an extent. And then what's worse, they make these poor, starving Indian guys walk their elephants the whole way while they ride on them in comfort. I get that Indy and them said they'd help out, but the optics of this is no bueno. Even Indy at no point is like, no, you rest for a bit, I'll walk with it for a little while. With all that in mind, the film definitely plays into the white savior trope to an almost excessive degree, which again, definitely doesn't help the film hold up. Argument number 3. It's racist and or inappropriate for the villains to be worshipping Kali, a Hindu god who is generally considered to be good, not evil. Was this inappropriate? Survey says, overall, yes, but let's talk about it.
We got into a little more controversy when we made this Kali cult the villains because people thought we were attacking Eastern Indians, which we weren't.
Plenty of gods and many cultures and religions, including, say, Christianity, are worshipped or used by bad guys to justify their bad behavior. I mean, isn't that exactly what happens in Last Crusade? With that said, it'd be like if a movie made a cult of Jesus worshippers look like, I don't know, this? And we're told that this statue is supposed to be Jesus. Typically, they'd be like Satan worshippers, right? There are bad guys in Hindu mythology, so it'd make more sense for these guys to be worshipping one of them. If you're a general audience in America, you would easily think that Kali is some evil Satan-like entity, which, again, I definitely did watching this film growing up, so maybe it can have a similar effect to the previous point about the feast, in that it can give people an inaccurate negative view of this culture. Oh, what else?
You said great. You liked it.
I thought it was weird there's just a random voodoo doll of Indiana lying around. Like, what is this? Where did it come from? Why did they send an assassin when they could have just grabbed the doll and snapped its neck or something? Does this have anything to do with any Indian culture? I honestly completely forgot about this aspect of the movie, and I'm almost convinced I Berenstain Bears myself into an alternate universe. So should we cancel the movie because of all this stuff? No. It's not fucking Birth of a Nation, y'all. But there definitely are positive discussions to be had about the way non-white cultures have historically been depicted in Hollywood, and this film certainly has its place in that conversation. You can debate all day in the comments as to whether you want to call this film racist until your fucking face melts, and while I will say that I found some of it to be clearly an offensive portrayal by today's standards, the film is incredibly campy. And a lot of this stuff does fit with that tone. And if tweaked and executed better, there probably wouldn't have been much controversy. I'm not here to tell you how you're supposed to feel about these things. I get a lot of comments from people who think I'm ordering them to be offended by something or another, and I'm really not trying to do that. I'm just pointing out audience perceptions and the way movies are made today, and comparing them to the era from which the movie comes from. Maybe I'll throw in my own opinion or analysis here and there, but I try to stay mostly neutral, giving you the facts from modern academic and sociological perspectives, and letting you decide what to do with that information yourself. There's a very, very solid Indiana Jones film in here that's held back by a somewhat weak script. While not the clear and obvious masterpiece that is Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom is still a very good movie that kept me engaged throughout. That said, in my opinion, it narrowly toes the line between making fun of those old-timey adventure serials that were brutally racist and sexist, and just doing the same racist and sexist things. So, does Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom hold up? Before I answer that, I want to rescind my previous statement of Raiders, where I said it was in the middle in regard to holding up, and give Raiders a full stamp of approval and hand the in the middle designation to Temple of Doom. It's still a great action-adventure film, more engaging than the vast majority of copycats that have come out in the last 40 years. But the outdated humor and portrayal of certain characters bring the film down in regard to it holding up today. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments if you agree with me, don't say anything if you don't, and be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.